I think we'll need something for the AI world. There'll be something around vibe coding applications where the frameworks need to have that tightly defined security boundary. And so the vibe code, whatever you generate, doesn't matter if it has bugs in it because there's sort of a limit as to what it can actually do or impact. And we'll need to move around those boundaries of where the security layer is because historically we didn't really need them. We had deterministic code, things were reviewed and checked in. So just like the frameworks will change, but it'll be the same thing we did in the browser. And obviously that choice we made with the browser was great. The impact of that was incredible. We got tons of more stuff getting built and tons of more apps and websites and experiences and people connecting. But in the interim, there'll probably be a period where it's pretty shaky.
You are listening to The Secure Developer, where we speak to industry leaders and experts about the past, present, and future of DevSecOps and AI security. We aim to help you bring developers and security together to build secure applications while moving fast and having fun. This podcast is brought to you by Snyk. Snyk's developer security platform helps developers build secure applications without slowing down. Snyk makes it easy to find and fix vulnerabilities in code, open source dependencies, containers, and infrastructure as code, all while providing actionable security insights and administration capabilities. To learn more, visit snyk.io/TSD.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Secure Developer. I'm Danny Allan, CTO at Snyk, and I'm very excited to have with me today the founder and CEO of WorkOS, and that is Michael Grinich. Michael, you've been in the development space and building really cool things for a very long time, but maybe you can introduce yourself for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to connect. As Danny said, I'm the founder and CEO of WorkOS, which is a company I've been building for a bit over 6 years. We help developers with enterprise features in their app. So we talk about it in terms of making your app enterprise ready. And a lot of this has to do with things like authentication, how people log in, user management, how they're provisioned, access control, permissions, security, logging. But we do a lot of stuff around encryption as well, and generally just helping increase your posture as a developer so you can take your app up market and get bigger customers and grow. Like I said, we've been at it for 6 years and change. And today we power over 1,000 different applications in the market, like in production, lots of startups and then lots of bigger startups you might have heard of, like OpenAI, Anthropic, Perplexity, Cursor, which probably a lot of people here listening to the podcast are familiar with. We power auth and identity for them. And then folks like Webflow and Vercel and Netlify and Plaid, kind of fan favorite developer product companies. So we are sort of the enterprise features platform for those companies, and helping them grow and scale at market. We care a lot about building stuff for developers and providing really safe and secure infrastructure for them to build their products.
Well, in that way, WorkOS and Snyk, Michael, seem to have a lot in common in that we're very developer-centric and focused on developer workflows. But for you, what does it mean, or for WorkOS, what does it mean to have a developer-friendly experience? Like, what are the problems that they run into, and what are the problems they're trying to solve?
Yeah, we center our whole company around the developer experience. Our number one operating principle is developer joy that we talk about. And what that means to us is to allow someone who's building something, who's in that creative state of making the thing, to really stay in that creative mindset and not get distracted by needing to go build things that otherwise other people have already done or might just slow them down. So we like to take care of all the things that are kind of the table stakes features in a SaaS product. And that usually is things around authentication, logging, security, specifically if you're building one of these B2B apps. WorkOS, we don't really focus on consumer products or social things or games. We really focus on B2B applications where there's a lot of kind of gnarly stuff under the hood you have to deal with if you're going to go serve a big customer. And so we like to solve all of that in a way with really crisp and easy to understand APIs that are really predictable, that integrate everywhere, that plug into all the different systems. So you kind of just read the API docs once, or you can even kind of guess what the thing does, plug it in, and then you're done. That whole surface area is completely solved for you. And you can stay in that creative flow state. I think building software like engineering is an extremely creative pursuit in my mind. It's very similar to writing or making music or something like that. And so every time a developer gets distracted by that or has to go debug something, it just slows them down. It slows down that creative spirit and the ability to actually make something really, really magical. And so our number one operating principle around that is developer joy, but really think about trying to keep people in that flow state with great docs, great experience, and just generally a product that does what it says it does, and delivers it with like really, really high uptime and robustness. So you don't really have to think about it ever.
Yeah, I always say as soon as you increase cognitive load or switch context state, you're already losing the battle. And so if you can keep them within flow state and not distracted from what they're trying to do, that's the best possible outcome as they're building software. We're living in an interesting time right now where AI, though, is, I've heard at least, is going to replace developers in a very significant way. What is your response to that? Do you think developers go away when AI becomes more prevalent, or no, they just become more creative and have freedom to do more, innovative things going forward?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's just going to change. I don't think there's a way that we can say they're going to go away or stay or be the same or different. I think what it means to write software is going to change like dramatically. And also the impact of software in our lives is changing dramatically. As a corollary to this, if you think back historically for things like music, I mentioned making music earlier, it used to be the case that every family had a piano in their home because there wasn't recorded music. The technology did not exist to record and play back music. This is before, the phonograph. And it was common that like somebody in your family or somebody in your, neighborhood would like learn how to play music, and you would have sheet music. And after dinner, what you would do is stand around the piano and sing and play music together. And that was entertainment for you, before the radio, before the phonograph. I think about software engineering as kind of like that today. There's usually just like 1 out of 20 people or, 1 out of 100 people that kind of knows how to write code and build stuff. And you have to go to school to learn it or spend a lot of time to learn this really kind of esoteric, complex way of thinking, where historically we've had to go to the machine. We have to learn how the computer thinks, how the computer represents data and information, and then you can have control over it and build stuff. But only a small number of people have ever had that, technique or ability. And everyone else has been like, listening to music that just they played. It's switching, where in the music sense, obviously we got recorded music and we got more instruments and became easier to make stuff. And now anybody can make music, with Guitar Band, Guitar Hero, as a game, or GarageBand on their phone or something, or Ableton, it's so much easier to make music than ever before. If you would take what we have today in terms of instruments and gone back and shown it to those people with those pianos in their homes, it would be completely foreign to them, right? They wouldn't even associate that with making music and what music was. And I think it's going to be the same type of thing with actually building software, where we're enabling more people to do it, but we're enabling them to do it in a way that's totally different than how historically we have done it. And we'll go through that transition. There will always be room for software engineers thinking about systems engineering and application structure and frameworks and tools. In the same way, we still have people that play piano today. We still have pianos on stage. The piano is still a key element in music that we have today. And many people still have them in their homes, right? But the role has totally shifted. And so I don't know what that's actually going to turn into. It's changing, literally week to week or month to month, which is just absolutely thrilling to watch and be part of. But the only thing I know is that it's going to be significantly different in the future. And I'm very optimistic about it. Because if you think about the music we have today, I think the music we have today is a lot better than back then when everyone was playing off the sheet music. We just have so much more stuff, so the music is so much better. And I think we're going to go through a similar transformation with software and just generally the technology industry.
I love that analogy of the piano, and I'm going to steal it going forward, mostly because I have 2 pianos in my own home and people that play the piano, but I also love music. And I agree with you, by the way. We're still going to have software engineers that are building and designing, but we're just going to have a whole lot more app creators, whatever that looks like. I always say,
totally.
I still create applications, even though I probably shouldn't. But in my free time, I still do that. And I think what we'll end up with is everyone being able to create applications, but some people focused on the back-end engineering side of it.
Yeah, I think we'll have a lot more platforms creating components. The interfacing between those things will be a lot more seamless. There'll be a lot more choice integrations. They'll just be easier to make stuff. But it's really hard to guess. Like if you think about the piano, the well-tempered clavier, like the old style, instrument that people would have, and then you go to something like the 1980s. The keytar. you ever seen one of those? It's like a guitar, that's a keyboard, they play on stage with like hair metal and stuff. Like that change from the piano to that, I think that's what's going to happen around software development and engineering. And nobody could have anticipated that, going back to that time. So we're just honestly trying to keep up with it in terms of us at WorkOS with all the stuff that we're building. I mentioned some of the companies earlier, like we're powering a lot of these like AI products as they're scaling and growing. So we get really sort of a front row seat at what's changing and what they're thinking about, what's evolving. The most compelling part of it to me is just like the democratization of it. It makes it makes technology more accessible, easier to use, easier to think about, faster to get from idea to like something that's actually working. And that's always been the most exciting thing to me about software is the immediacy of it and closing that speed of that feedback cycle. And with these AI products or vibe coding or platforms or whatever you want to call it, call this whole thing, it has that at the root of it, which I'm just so glad that's the center of everything happening.
Do you expect to see more hybrid applications and software going forward? In other words, where agents are creating some of the code and humans are creating the code? And do you envision a world where it's just-in-time composable applications? In other words, you're not composing it for a point in time and everyone gets it, but it's more personalized. Like, how do you see AI changing the world of software delivery?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty weird when you can like just describe the type of app that you want and it can just be like generated and made right in front of you. It's kind of the difference between like, going to a restaurant and having a set menu. You just like order off the menu. That's all that's there versus like, describing what you're feeling like eating, or what mood you're in or something like that. There's a cocktail bar in San Francisco I used to go to years ago where they had no menu and you would just kind of talk with the bartender about how you were feeling that day. And based on what was in season and kind of what they thought, they would just kind of make something for you, make it up. I think it'll be kind of like that, where that will be a big component of how we use these systems. I don't know if we call it vibe coding, but it's more like, just in time created or like user created software. For internal applications and certainly in the business case, it's just going to be transformative for that. I mean, nobody loves their internal tools. Nobody loves their internal app builders. They've been this like clunky, hard to use, bad ergonomics type of experiences. That's one area where there's just enormous potential to make something easier for people to use, just like real people at their jobs versus like software engineers. We've had those transformations and things like Microsoft Excel is incredibly easy to use, and Lotus Notes, and VisiCalc before that, and democratization of tools like Notion have been really easy to use too on kind of the wiki side and information sharing. But there's still things that are really complicated to do in terms of generating applications with real complex, transformations that need to happen or data visualization. Those haven't been something you could just put in a wiki tool. And so what we're seeing is this like rapid change around how easy it is to author those things. And there's definitely going to be places where there's entire new categories of software that are like opened up because of those generative capabilities. I think we're literally just seeing like the very beginnings of it right now.
And how do you think that impacts, I mean, this is called the Secure Developer, the podcast, the security or the performance or the drudgery, I'll say, of application development going forward? In other words, I can't imagine you would say, hey, you should vibe code your own cryptography or your own IDP or identity systems. Do you think it makes things better, worse? Like, how do you see it impacting a lot of the governance around the software?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we're thinking about a ton and talking with customers about. Like, you certainly don't want to vibe code, generate like your security code, your security infrastructure. There was a recent thing I read about a company that had done this in their application and vibe coded their auth piece, and it worked. They logged in, they tested it. But what they found when they went into production was actually all the validation was done client side. It's completely easy to bypass, right? And yeah. And it's kind of a trivial example, but to the LLM, that's secure, right? That's actually defined as secure. And so I think we'll see something where the way that applications are built will change a bit. We'll go in a different direction from kind of like the monolithic, apps. I mean, that's already changing. We're taking monolithic apps and deconstructing them into different components that we tie together. I think it used to be called microservices. I think they won't be as micro as they maybe were in the past, tiny services, but components, service-oriented architecture of these things together. And some of those will have different security pieces. Some of them might be untrusted, and some of them might be trusted, where it's much more secure and it's much harder to change the code in that. To kind of predict the future or anticipate the future, I always like to look at the past. What have we done historically? And there's a very good parallel to this, actually, in terms of how we built browsers. So the early days of the browsers, like, Netscape and then later Internet Explorer, which was kind of my browser I grew up on, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were tons of vulnerabilities in it. I mean, the thing, like every week, you talk about like viruses getting downloaded and worms and stuff. And a lot of that came from the extensibility of the platform that Microsoft added, things like ActiveX, kind of dating myself here, but that was an enormous source of vulnerabilities, or Java servlets, applets that are running actually inside the browser, and plugins and extensions and Flash and all of this stuff. And the browser was actually a huge attack vector. It made the entire operating system insecure once you had this stuff. Don't click the executable that just got downloaded, or don't do whatever. In the moment when the internet was blowing up and the whole value of the OS was connecting it to these external things, we eventually figured it out through sandboxing. Eventually the browser we sandboxed. I think Chrome was the first one where they actually did sandboxing per process. So you could have this tight isolation between these different systems where it really wasn't possible to break out from the runtime, the JavaScript runtime externally. And defining that as like the security boundary actually lets users run more untrusted code on their machines, not less, because we can have that defined sandbox where it can exist, and the browser itself is doing the enforcement. I think we'll need something for the AI world. There'll be something around vibe coding applications where the frameworks need to have that tightly defined security boundary. And so the vibe code, whatever you generate, doesn't matter if it has bugs in it, because there's sort of a limit as to what it can actually do or impact. And we'll need to move around those boundaries of where the security layer is, because historically we didn't really need them. We had deterministic code, things were reviewed and checked in. So just like the frameworks will change, but it'll be the same thing we did in the browser. And obviously that choice we made with the browser was great. Like the impact of that was incredible. We got tons of more stuff getting built and tons of more apps and websites and experiences and people connecting. But in the interim, there'll probably be a period where it's pretty shaky. In the same way we had lots of browser exploits, during that era before we kind of figured out the right boundaries and semantics. I wouldn't be surprised if there's similar things that are going to happen around AI-based systems. And there's a lot of interesting startups and interesting work happening with people that are trying to figure out how to sandbox LLMs, or how to like have evals that look at the prompt output, or as a company I met with recently that's doing kind of cyber insurance for LLM behavior, because you don't want the chatbot, like acting racist or something like that for your customers. So we're history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes. And there's a lot of this from the browser era. I think, just look 20, 30 years back, we can kind of learn from it then.
What do you equate to so I remember the browser wars well. In fact, I started before there was browsers, so I'm really dating myself to Tin. I used Tin on Unix systems, and I remember Mosaic, it radically changed my life. And the email was Pine, and
Pine is not Elm. I think that's the recursive acronym, right? Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Links, that was a browser I'd use, yeah.
But then we get to the browser wars, and there was a clear winner of the browser wars, is what I'll say. Like there's Netscape and Opera and Internet Explorer. There's a clear winner. What is the equivalent of that in the AI era? Like, is it the models? Is it the software in conjunction with the models, like the libraries and frameworks? What do you see as the parallel to the browsers?
Yeah, it's another great question. I don't know. If you would have asked me maybe 2 years ago, like who was going to win, I would probably have just said OpenAI. OpenAI, there's the talent density they have, the financing they have. It's so hard to build and train these foundation models. At least historically, you looked at it and you're like, how is anyone going to catch these guys? It costs so much money to build these things and scrape the data, and they're just so far ahead. A couple things have happened since then in the last 2 years that has actually convinced me that it maybe won't be a winner takes all. I mean, OpenAI is doing great. It's not a dig against them. The first thing is actually what XAI did. If you look at how fast they were able to build and train the Grok model, and they threw lots of money at it, right? It wasn't efficient. They built this enormous data center extremely fast and just like raw, brute forced it. But the results are, you can't argue with them in terms of the quality and impact of that model and what they built. And so to me, that says actually, it's actually relatively easy to reproduce these models if you have capital. And certainly there's kind of infinite capital in the world going towards productivity enhancements like AI. So there's not going to be one company that has like the Uber model that beats everyone. It's this neck and neck race. And we've seen that with Anthropic and others as well too recently. So that's the first thing. The second thing is actually more recent, and this is around MCP. So MCP is a protocol. If you live on kind of terminally online like I am on Twitter, everybody talks about it's this new standard for actually having LLM-based chat applications interface with the big model providers. So you can take your Claude desktop and connect it to all these third-party apps and services. And it's sort of an extension to what we previously did with like REST APIs and JSON, but built around this like text-based tool calling in the LLM world. That's something that Anthropic introduced last fall. I think I can't, in the 10 years since January, it feels like, it's like,
going faster
than
anything I've seen in the past.
Yeah. Let's say 6 months, something like that, 6 months ago. What's really cool is like they introduced this concept and it was just the beginnings of a standard. And since then there's been actually an enormous amount of collaboration between Anthropic's MCP team and other people in the ecosystem and a bunch of different startups. Like we've done some stuff with them, but also with OpenAI. Also, Block built their Goose, their open source, client. That's like an MCP client that can work in this way. Postman's doing cool stuff with it. Sentry's building cool stuff. Cloudflare and Vercel and Netlify, it's like the one area they're actually kind of thinking about collaborating around. Even OpenAI announced that they're going to adopt MCP for ChatGPT. And I just saw literally today, that they're doing the same for Copilot. Like Microsoft is announcing MCP support for Windows with Copilot. And so this is another area where standards are starting to actually like very quickly emerge and companies are kind of collectively building around this. And that also gives me a lot of like hope and promise that it's not just this one single winner takes all. We only build into a single ecosystem. We need something kind of like Unix for like AI platform development. And it existed in the web era. We got stuff like HTML, from and HTTP from thankfully from Tim Berners-Lee and folks like that working on the web and Mosaic and Netscape. And it started to consolidate, at the time. Chrome did win the browser wars today, you could say. Chromium and WebKit and stuff like that. But the web is still an open standard. There's still open standards bodies. In many ways, it's still open. In the mobile era, that did not happen, right? We have like Android and iOS, and there's choice in that there's two, but they're kind of both locked ecosystems. You could say Android's more open, but it's kind of still locked down. You're still in the Play Store. There's a very interesting moment right now, exactly right now in the AI space, where we're going to decide whether these are open platforms and open standards or closed platforms and closed standards. And optimistically, I think that they're trending towards being open ones, and that the people working at these companies understand actually for the actual promise of these AI products to be as, magically impactful in the world as we hope, they need to be open. They need to be open from the beginning. And I'm just really, really optimistic based on, fingers crossed it's actually going to happen. I'm just kind of observing this, but all signs look good so far.
Yeah, completely agree. Fingers crossed, knock on wood kind of thing. One of the things that encouraged me on the MCP front, I've been very worried about authentication authorization, but the good news is Anthropic, when they designed it, it's very similar to the language server protocol, LSP, and are using similar data structures, JSON, RPC, but they're applying the same principles from those old platforms in a very open, extensible way. And so I think there's lots of opportunities. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but you just hosted recently an MCP night in the Bay Area. What were some of the interesting projects that you saw come out of that?
Yeah, we did this event last week in SF at the Exploratorium, which is a great venue. So it was kind of an experiment. We wanted to bring together a bunch of people building stuff around MCP. You were mentioning around authorization. There's a recent change to the MCP spec that adds the ability for third-party systems to act as authorization servers in an OAuth sense for an MCP server. So you can kind of separate out the authorization and resource server. I won't get into details around how the actual OAuth stuff is implemented, but the short version is like now we actually have auth for MCP. And if you're using WorkOS, it's like enterprise grade auth for MCP. Very exciting because all these huge companies want to use MCP and they don't know what to do around auth. You got to have auth for these things. So we're like, okay, we're gonna demo some of this stuff. We're gonna bring some people together, throw this event. I was like texting friends of mine at different companies, so we had people from Cloudflare come talk about their MCP hosting. Dave Kramer, who's one of the co-founders of Sentry, came and talked about his MCP stuff that they've built, which is just totally wizard. From Vercel, some people came. We had a great panel, including some people that were previously at Okta working on identity stuff. And we had like 500 people show up to this to this event. It was crazy. It was completely packed. We threw this great party afterward. And I think in addition to there just being so many cool things that are getting built right now, there's just this like electric energy and enthusiasm for it amongst people that like building stuff, that like making things. And I have always found that if you want to figure out where the future is going, go look where the developers are spending time, what they're hacking on, what they do after 5 o'clock. Like, who do they hang out with? What do they talk about? What events do they go to? It was a good party afterward, but I think the reason people came wasn't like, they're just the free food. It was because they're just enthusiastic and excited about this as the direction things are going. And that feels like it's a compounding force that's going to have a lot of energy throughout the rest of this year and beyond.
Yeah. I know there's been similar meetups, I'll say, here in the Boston area. I'm based on the East Coast, of course, but at MIT. And there is an energy that I have not seen in the past even 20 years. And I attribute it to the possibilities around AI and some of the things that are happening. I think developers are just getting excited by the possibility of the future. And so I guess to that point, Michael, what makes you most exciting? So obviously WorkOS is doing some really cool things in helping the B2B space, but what do you think are, the big things that we can solve as a technology industry over the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, a decade is... I'll just try to do the next
2 years, 2 years, 6 months, probably.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It seriously feels like a decade since January because there's so much stuff happening. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is that, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I live in San Francisco. I love the Bay Area. I like go skiing in the winter and surfing and stuff. But another benefit of living here is you're really in the center of the Silicon Valley kind of technology industry. And these evening events that people are hacking stuff together, you just get a glimmer into where things are going and into the future. With WorkOS, we've always lived at this boundary in between developers building stuff, apps, whatever, new design tools, recruiting tools, things for, lawyers and doctors and whatever, engineers, between them and enterprise customers, big companies that want to adopt these products. WorkOS sits in between the two of those things. And we help those developers with all those enterprise features in their app. In the last year, these AI companies have grown insanely fast, and they've grown insanely fast on WorkOS. We've had people integrate and just blow out the growth numbers that we previously see from companies. And I don't think it's a coincidence. What I'm seeing is that these big companies, these enterprises, are actually realizing that there's an enormous opportunity to transform their organization, how they operate by using AI. It truly is like the dream of technology to automate things, to allow people to do things more efficiently. It's not robots are coming for our jobs. It's that we can actually stay in that creative flow state. And the example I gave earlier around engineers, writing code, and maybe people listening to this that are developers, every job has a version of that. Like people that are accountants have a version of flow state for accounting. And people that are designers have the version of that for designers. People that are recruiters have the version of that for recruiters. And there's an opportunity for us to build something like a cursor for every job, that's out there, powered by AI to enable people to be more creative and be more thoughtful and for it to be really personalized around their work. And AI, I think, is the ticket to that. The challenge is going to be actually how do we roll it out? So that future is here. We see it today. I'm living in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. I'm using Cursor. I can write code 1,000 times faster than I ever have before. And I can build crazy stuff. How do we get that into the hands of everybody else that's not writing code in their jobs? And I think that's going to be the next 10 or 20 years, honestly. Maybe it'll happen a lot faster. It certainly seems to be accelerating, but distributing that feature into every job and building products and services that people can use, and specifically that enterprises can adopt in a way that's like safe and secure, that's going to be the hard part. That's the real challenge, because they're not just going to vibe code their way to doing their taxes or their corporate finances. They're not going to vibe code their way into HR systems or medical stuff for doctors, right? There's real consequences if things go wrong. In the software world, we kind of got it easy. If the thing doesn't work or crashes, we just say, Cursor, you made a mistake. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry. Let me go fix that. That doesn't work if you're doing surgery on someone. And so it'll be slower in certain areas to get adopted. But I think the area that I'm most interested in is actually how do we take this groundbreaking, kind of breathtaking new technology, this new way of interfacing with machines, and apply it out in the world and do it in a way that's actually kind of safe and exciting, and not in a way that has, disastrous consequences in some cases. And I hope that WorkOS can play a small part in that.
Well, I'm sure you will be able to do that. I mean, you've been doing amazing things. I always say that technology, and in this case, AI, can't realize its full potential unless people trust the technology itself. Are there KPIs or things that you would point to that enable organizations to take that cultural leap or to take that shift that has to take place in order to adopt it? Like, is it just a time thing that people become more comfortable with it? Or are there specific tangible things that we can do to help people become more comfortable that this is the way forward?
I think there's a technology bit, which is actually like how you practically use these things or roll them out to your team, or how you actually get people's hands on it. We see this a lot with companies putting budget towards AI, saying, hey, we know this is going to change the way we work. We don't know exactly how, but we know we need to go figure it out. Back when I was as a student, I actually built a lot of iPhone apps when I was an undergrad. It was like when I was an undergrad actually at MIT, there was a lot of mobile app development, and I did it for kind of walking around money, essentially building apps for local companies in Boston. I met with all these companies and they said, we don't really know much about the iPhone or the platform, but we know we got to do something. We know we got to start figuring it out. I got to build something and try to understand how this fits into our business, because we can tell it's going to be really disruptive. We know there's going to be a change. There's a ton of that happening right now with companies where they're earmarking budget for it and expanding and building stuff. But I'm not really sure actually how it's going to come out. I think there's a cultural shift. Some companies, I think, will just wake up one day and say, oh man, we've been sleeping on this. We got to urgently jump after it. I think that's probably already happened. Most people have had their own personal ChatGPT moment where they start talking to the thing and they're like, oh my God. And then that happens like 10 more times. You're like, it can do what? It can do what? It can do what? What can't this thing do? If you think about a business as kind of a collection of people, all having that moment together collectively as a business, I think we're going through that right now. And that's why you're seeing these tools get adopted so fast. The people that are saying hit the brakes are the security folks. They're the ones saying like, oh, hold on, guys, let's not roll this out, and connect it to everything. These AI systems they're really only valuable if they have context. So they have to be connected to stuff. And if they can do actions. And those both are super sensitive things, giving data access and giving data, having it allow it to make changes and mutations. That's where a lot of these startups are working, but it'll just take us a while to figure out like what the right controls and primitives are around that for these systems, whether they're agents or MCP servers or, LLM bots or whatever. There'll be a cultural change, and then there'll also be a technology change. And typically they happen kind of in tandem.
Well, I've no doubt that we will reach there. We've always, as an industry, been able to overcome the challenges that are in front of us. And, WorkOS has proven that over and over again. Well, Michael, thank you for joining us today on The Secure Developer. Always exciting to have someone who has a great perspective on the, groundswell of what's happening and pulse on the industry. So to everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us today on The Secure Developer. We look forward to speaking with you next time. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to The Secure Developer, brought to you by Snyk. We hope this episode gave you new insights and strategies to help you champion security in your organization. If you like these conversations, please leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share the episode with fellow security leaders who might benefit from our discussions. We'd love to hear your recommendations for future guests, topics, or any feedback you might have to help us get better. Please contact us by connecting with us on LinkedIn under our Snyk account, or by emailing us at thesecuredev@snyk.io. That's it for now. I hope you join us for the next one.